Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome back to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. We have a topic on today's show that we have never talked about. I think it's a term that gets tossed about often, and we don't really understand exactly what it means. We're talking about narcissism and narcissistic abuse and how to heal from it. My guest, who I'm thrilled to have on, really is an expert in this subject. Brenda Stevens is a licensed professional clinical counselor who works solely with survivors of narcissistic abuse and trauma. She obtained her education through the University of Wisconsin system, where she graduated with honors. And Brenda is the founder of a group practice in Southern California and the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Center, a coaching practice assisting survivors of narcissistic abuse globally. She offers training to other therapists to help them support their clients who are children, partners, and others who have been abused by a person or persons with narcissistic traits. She is the author of Recovering from Narcissistic Mothers, A Daughter's Guide, and the Narcissism Recovering Workbook, Healing from Emotional Abuse. She has presented at conferences, appeared on several podcasts, including this one, to talk about narcissistic abuse, and recently appeared in a documentary on covert narcissism, which we cover. There's 3 types of narcissism that she talks about that are really interesting. You're going to want to listen to the entire episode. She also talks about symptoms of narcissism, whether you know you're with a narcissist, how to work through that, how to transform that relationship. Well, you can't change a narcissist, that's for sure. So we need to know that and be aware of that. We need support. If you're in a narcissistic relationship with a family member or a romantic partner, or maybe you are divorced from someone with narcissism, or you've had anybody with narcissism in your life, a coworker, a friend, a neighbor, it doesn't matter. This episode is so important for you to listen to because we really get into it on what to do, what not to do, how to approach it, and you'll want to listen to the whole episode, like I said. And to support you in the journey, grab the journal, the trigger journal, the healing journal, I call it. It's at Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com/free resources. Share this episode. If you found it helpful, please share it. If you know someone that's in a relationship with a possible narcissist, I know we're throwing that term around, but it's important for you to understand exactly who is a narcissist, what are the symptoms, and we talk about one important factor. They often have outside relationships going, multiple outside relationships, possibly struggle with addictions. You'll want to listen to this episode. Please share it so we can get the word out, so we can help more people on the healing journey. So without further ado, here's my very important conversation with Brenda Stevens. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so grateful you're joining me for this very important conversation. We've actually never had a conversation about narcissistic abuse, Brenda, on the show. So this is our first conversation around this topic, and I am so pleased you are here with us. Thank you, Brenda, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to be the first one to talk about this on your show. I'm honored.
It's such an important topic, and it's one that people are throwing the word around narcissism, and I think it can get misinterpreted, overused, and misunderstood. So that's why I really hope today to get some clarity around what is it does it stand for, talk to us a little bit more in depth. But before we get into that, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience and just how did you get into this work?
I feel like my story is probably one that is similar to other therapists. However, I will say my name is Brenda Stevens. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor in California, and I'm licensed in a few other states as well. I have a group practice here in San Diego in California, and I also the founder of the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Center, which it for short stands for NARC, or is NARC for short. I've trained all the therapists that work at my practice. They all have training in treating survivors of narcissistic abuse. And I want to say a little caveat here that survivors of narcissistic abuse, victims, those are words that I try to be very careful about using. And I have not found a better word yet than survivor or victim. And I hate to say it like that, but the reason I say victim, and if I could create a new word for that, I would. But narcissists tend to prey on people. And that is why the word victim stands out to me. And I'll explain that a little bit more later. But I just want people to know that I don't take that lightly. That is something that I've given a lot of thought to. Outside of that, what brought me to this work is my own life experience, but what really kind of pushed it forward was when I went into private practice, and even before that, I had a lot of mostly women, because mostly women come to therapy, but it was mostly women coming in telling me about their relationships. And most of them would say, I feel like I'm going crazy, which has kind of been like our motto now. Like, if you feel like you're going crazy, this might be a red flag. The stories were so similar, and the stories resonated with me so much with my own relationship with a narcissist who I'd been with for a very long time. And I literally was starting to say to myself, do they all know him? Are they all dating him? It was so similar that it's just kind of become a joke now, but it was true. At first I was like, how do they all know him? What I know now, years later, is that the narcissists tend to do behavior that is very similar to one another. And I like to say too, it's almost like they all have a playbook that they share. And this is why there's so much similarity in the stories. But that is how this all started. Some of my own experience, and then having all of these stories that resonated with me as a therapist, working with clients and seeing that there was a real need for them to be heard and seen, and probably most importantly, validated. People don't understand this kind of abuse, and there is now, that it's changed, but back then there weren't a lot of avenues for them to go and get the validation and the understanding, and even therapists that could kind of delineate the difference between typical emotional abuse and the emotional abuse with a twist that is narcissistic abuse.
Thank you for saying that at the beginning, because I think that's an important distinction about victim and kind of a survivor.
Yes.
And how that is an important part of recovery, narcissistic abuse recovery. Mm-hmm. How would you define a narcissist, just so we're on the same page, so we can get a shared language and understanding about what does it mean and how do you know you're in relationship with a narcissist?
Yes. Oh, that's a big question. So I will say, in agreement with what's been said before, I think the word or the term narcissist is thrown around kind of willy-nilly these days. We see somebody who's selfish and call them a narcissist. And a true narcissist, it's way more than just being selfish. It is someone who puts their needs above all others, no matter what. And the big difference between somebody who could be emotionally abusive and somebody who could be narcissistically abusive is this lack of empathy, the presence of intent in their abuse. We can all be emotionally abusive to someone that we love. But typically when someone who doesn't have narcissistic traits gets in an argument with somebody that they love and they say something that's emotionally abusive, we typically will come back and try to repair that. We'll feel bad about losing our cool, losing our temper. A narcissist, when they're being emotionally abusive, they do it with intent, and their intent is to control and to kind of chip away at their victims. And I do mean victims again, but they chip away at their victims' confidence and their self-sense, which gives the narcissist more control to manipulate and more control to keep that victim as a source of supply for ego for the narcissist. And I can explain more about that if you want, but that is their goal, to get the supply of ego that they don't have within them.
That would be beautiful. Can you explain that?
Sure. And I know that I'm using probably too clinical of terms here, but that sense of ego, that sense of self is very undeveloped in narcissists. And that may seem counterintuitive to what people think, because when we think of a narcissist, we think of somebody who's really grandiose, who's looking for attention, who's having the spotlight on them. And to most of us, that could look like confidence. And that is also, we have different terms for different types of narcissists. That one that I just described is typically considered to be a malignant narcissist. And this is kind of the stereotypical narcissist that most of us can probably have pop into our minds when we hear that term. Even though there is this image of confidence and self-worth, it doesn't really exist. With narcissists, no matter what type of narcissist they are, they have a very fragile ego, meaning a very fragile sense of self. They're trying to get attention and affirmation from other people. in order to have that reflected back at them. And that is then how they see themselves. That is how they feel a sense of ego, even though it's fragile. It's fragile when you're only getting what's mirrored back to you. So you have to kind of have that supply. I used that term before. You have to have that supply of kind of ego from other people constantly in order to feel kind of normal for them.
That makes sense. Is it rooted in childhood trauma? And if so, what does that look like? Because it's hard for people in a relationship with someone that's narcissistic to see that they have a fragile ego.
Of course, right? This is technical talk that I know that I'm using here. It is very difficult to see. And if someone is not a malignant narcissist, it's even harder to see. But there are different types that kind of fly under the radar. But to answer your question, it almost always develops in childhood, maybe universally. It develops in childhood and typically from abuse and neglect. And I would say probably equally between the two, but the neglect leads that child to develop a sense of self that isn't naturally developed as it is in children in healthy environments. They find ways to get attention, which then as the mirroring starts very, very young, they find ways to get attention. And often that is to be kind of extra or flamboyant in some way, or achieving great things and certainly bragging about it, because that then brings the attention. There is research out there about whether it's nature versus nurture, that kind of thing. They almost always come from a traumatic childhood. There is research saying that there is probably a genetic component that maybe leads someone towards that kind of narcissistic path versus other ways that people kind of manage trauma throughout the lifetime. And sometimes, far more rarely, it's from overindulgence of the child. The child is being told that they can do nothing wrong. They're not disciplined. They don't have any expectations. And the parents are constantly praising and overindulging, which also, it may sound good. I don't know if it does to me as a therapist, but I think my lens is definitely on. But it's a terrible way for a child to be raised too, because they don't learn who they are, how to develop their own identity. And they're always trying to live up to this expectation of who they seem to be through their parents' eyes. I was just saying either path is not ideal. I mean, neither one is ideal. And it's far more common to come from abuse than it is to come from that kind of overindulgence.
It's so interesting for people to start conceptualizing the deeper development of narcissism. And then you mentioned malignant narcissism, and then there's different types. What are the other types?
So there are a lot of terms being thrown out there to subtype narcissists. I only use 3, and I feel like it kind of covers pretty generally speaking without getting too technical. But malignant, covert, I also use communal. I think communal is an important one to notice as well. And I'll talk about communal first because covert is complicated. But a communal narcissist is probably one that we've all seen. It's somebody who's going out and taking pictures of their volunteer work or their travels. This is not to say, though, that people who travel and do volunteer work are narcissists by any stretch of the imagination. But I would say that people with a truly altruistic heart will go out and do volunteer work, Habitat for Humanity, saving the whales, and whatever it is. They will do that out of the goodness of their heart and not necessarily need validation from it. A narcissist will do it because of the validation of it. So, and that's a small example of what a communal narcissist is. Often see them in helping professions too. Kind of makes sense if you think about it. Wanting to get the accolades of doing something good is going to happen naturally when you're in a helping profession. Fireman, a police officer, a doctor. And again, not saying that they're all that way, but these are the type of jobs that narcissists tend to be drawn to. I will jump into covert narcissism next, if that's okay. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Okay. So covert narcissist is a flavor all its own, and I will probably not do it justice without having notes in front of me to explain it properly. But a covert narcissist is one that we always think of as flying under the radar. So they tend to be more vulnerable. They tend to be self-effacing, which does not match our idea of what a narcissist is. You know, again, we think of somebody who's very boisterous and attention-getting. A covert narcissist may seem like an introvert. They may not want to have the spotlight on them, but they are still going to use the same tools of manipulation. They're going to use themselves as a victim to get the attention. This is why they're called vulnerable. It's not true vulnerability, but they will show some vulnerability in order to get attention. So it's kind of opposite of what we see with the malignant narcissist, where we have really someone who's maybe having a pity party for themselves, woe is me kind of narcissist, and that's not something we expect. So you can imagine if you got into a relationship with somebody like that and these red flags start popping up, but you see them as being so open with you and so ready to share their own feelings, you wouldn't necessarily think that they would kind of fall under that narcissistic umbrella.
That can be very confusing for people.
Very confusing.
Like the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Beautifully said. That is really, really what it is. And I think this really is very confusing for people. And like I said, clients in the beginning were coming to me, I think I'm going crazy, because they would be in this cycle, mostly with covert narcissists. It's easier to figure out with the malignant narcissist, but with a covert narcissist, it takes a long time to really kind of understand what's going on and see that these vulnerabilities that they're, I want to say in air quotes again, vulnerabilities that they're showing are really ways of manipulating.
They want to hook you in. So this is what's so hard, because people are like, I didn't see, I thought it was me. We have a lot of gaslighting, which is turning it, making you self-doubt yourself. So what are the red flags to know you're in a relationship with a narcissist?
Oh, there's so many. I think one of them is that confusion, feeling confused about your interactions with your partner or whomever it is. It could be a coworker, a friend, a parent. It could be anybody, a sibling. Leave a conversation feeling confused often. I mean, I think that's a big red flag when you notice that your words are being twisted in ways that you don't even make sense, how they got twisted when you're having conversations. And this often happens in arguments, but having conversations or arguments with them where suddenly you're so far off base, you don't even know what they are. You don't even know what's being talked about anymore. These are big red flags. I would say some smaller red flags might be in the beginning of the relationship, we call it love bombing. I think that's probably a pretty general term, right? But narcissists are known for love bombing in the beginning and during breakup and makeup times. They love bomb their victims. When we first meet this narcissist and partner with them, we can think that they are the most kind and caring and benevolent and just lovely person. They're showering us with love and maybe gifts and who knows what trips. It could be a lot of things. But then we see the mask start to slip. So we talk about narcissism as being wearing a mask. But sometimes you might be out to dinner with them and they're being kind and loving to you, but they're horrible to the waiter. I mean, that would be a big red flag. And just behaviors that aren't in sync with what you've seen given to you in the love bombing phase. It's important to remember when there aren't these consistencies, remember that your instinct is also telling you something too, or trust your gut. I feel like that is the one thing when people have been with the narcissist for a long time, they shut that off. Then so much confusing and conflicting information coming into them, they don't trust their intuition anymore and they kind of ignore it. But I say, trust your gut, trust what your body is telling you.
Yeah, they start self-doubting. Like, well, maybe it's me. Well, maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am overreacting. Well, maybe I didn't understand what they were saying. Maybe I am just coming on too intensely. I'm too much.
I feel like you may have had a conversation with the narcissist in
just a few. And with the clients, right? They just start self-doubting themselves. It's a real struggle. And then they're like, but they can be so nice. Yes. They can be so loving. And that begins the mind game.
Exactly. And I call this cognitive dissonance in the work that I do. And I know that's not the exact true term of cognitive dissonance, but I think what I've seen happen with my clients is that they meet this person, they've been very loving and kind and everything that they wanted, full of promises during the beginning of the relationship, we're going to have this great life together. And then the mask starts to slip. I've seen my clients, I've seen myself do this too in a relationship that I had, believe that that person was really the person, the love bombing person, that love bombing version that they got of the narcissist. Unfortunately, the real person is the one with the mask is slipping and you're seeing that kind of dark side of, and this is a terrible realization for any of us. We don't want to face that. And especially the longer we've been with somebody, to realize that they were never who we thought they were entails us also going through a lot of grief to move forward through this process. And the grief can be overwhelming, as you, I'm sure, know as a therapist. It's a very complicated grief because you're grieving something that never was. This person that never really existed, this relationship that was never really what we wanted it or hoped that it could be. And then throw kids into the mix and it's a whole other ball of wax there.
I feel like people are almost the idea of what they thought the relationship was. And so that grieving the reality
Yes.
of who the person is and what the relationship is takes a long time to
so
really
long.
accept that this is the person,
It does.
not the love bombing person.
No, I think this is the most difficult part of the healing process for people who are trying to recover from these relationships. And this is, to me, also the most vulnerable time in the healing process, because the grief can be so overwhelming. And we do hold on so tightly to those love bombing moments in the relationship that when we're faced with a choice, which we can be, I can go through the grief process and move forward and leave this relationship, or I can go back. A lot of people will go back, and they'll go back a few times, and that's very common in all kinds of abusive relationships. But you can only imagine when there aren't necessarily, and this is not to say across the board, but there aren't necessarily like physical signs where you've got bruises on your body that you can say, this person did this to me. It's confusing. It's kind of maddening even. And you're weighing this option of walking through this valley of grief, or going back, kind of putting your rose-colored glasses back on. A lot of people choose the rose-colored glasses, and I can't blame them. Who could blame them? But it doesn't get better. It almost never gets better. And I feel like it's just part of the path that people need to walk to get to that point where they're ready to go through the grief and put their relationship behind them.
Do you feel like one of the biggest red flags is not taking ownership for anything, or they may passive aggressively own it just to manipulate the person? So there's
Absolutely.
no true remorse and ownership for really anything.
There's no accountability. There's no remorse, no ownership. You're absolutely right. And there's very little empathy. So even if a narcissist has a moment of feeling empathy, it's going to pass quickly, and they're going to find a way to jump out of it because they can't tolerate that vulnerability of feeling some empathy. They're going to jump out of that and then turn any situation back onto their victim too. So accountability, absolutely not. They're going to make everyone around them accountable for anything that's gone wrong. They will not own it. They just can't tolerate it. There is no ego there, no sense of self there for them to tolerate big feelings like that. They can't do it.
I had one time I was working with somebody, and they literally said, I don't have empathy, out loud. And I thought, I had never had someone say, I don't have empathy. I don't have any empathy. I try, and the person didn't come across as narcissistic, and yet they were having relationships outside their marriage. It was a covert narcissist. It really plays with the partner in going, well, they don't look like you said, a malignant narcissist. They're not coming across as that. They can come across as sometimes humble. That's to preserve the ego. That's the mask you're talking about.
That is the mask. It is the mask. As we've already said, that is what is incredibly confusing, because it's not what we expect to see with a narcissist. But having somebody admit that they don't have empathy is pretty rare.
Very. I'd never had that happen in my 20 years.
Honestly, it's only been in my personal life that I've heard somebody say that, and that was my narcissist, my main one. I've had a couple myself too, but I was in a relationship with him for a very long time, and his brother was not doing well, and I was so concerned about his brother, and he said, I just don't care. I don't care if he lives or dies. And I thought, how on earth could you say that? And he said that, I don't have empathy. I don't have any empathy for him.
Yeah. And I think it's real. I think that's true. That's actually a truth. There was a truth that was breaking through the surface. Yeah. And to me, that was a breakthrough for the partner, because the partner could then go, oh, the veil is getting lifted.
Yes.
There's a truth coming forward, and now you have to reconcile. That is the truth. Even though it can appear he can have empathy. It's a very interesting, appear is the key word. Mm-hmm. And so nuance this just a little bit between a parent that might be narcissistic and a partner, because I think people get hung up on calling a parent a narcissist.
Yeah. It's hard for people to recognize that they were perhaps raised by a narcissist. I think this is one of the more difficult things people kind of come to terms with in therapy, because then you also have the same grief, but you look back at your childhood, and your whole childhood was not what you thought it was. And some people go through their childhood with the rose-colored glasses on, thinking my family was great and this and this. And then as they get older, they see the cracks. They see the cracks in the foundation. They see where the veil has been lifted, the mask has fallen. When they're in memory, when they're having memories of their childhood, I don't work with kids, so I don't have kids coming in the middle of this. So I get kind of the after effects. And what I see happens a lot is when people have children, when they have children of their own. I have to say this happened to me too. when you have that child, your first child, you're like, oh my God, this is what love is. I remember saying that when I had my first child. This is what love is. I never knew what love really, really was until now. And I think for someone who was raised by a narcissist, having that contrast of realizing I don't think my parent ever felt this way for me because they surely never treated me like that. And I think that is where people tend to start kind of thinking back. They kind of start looking back, wait, my mom never did this for me, or my dad never showed up for me like this. Eventually to therapy, hopefully, and they get support and validation wherever they turn. And when it comes to having a parent as a narcissist, it's really devastating. I feel like I should say, though, what I see happen a lot is people coming in because they are partnered with a narcissist, not realizing this isn't the first narcissist in their life. And we are attracted to what's familiar. And there may be like just little nuances in the behavior that they've seen in this partner that just felt familiar on a level that they weren't even aware of. But that familiarity may be the personality type. I've seen that happen.
Big. I have too.
Yeah.
And it's a lot to reckon with. They're really struggling to get out of this partnership. Or is it them? Or is it the partner and wanting the partner to change? If they would only own this, if they would only see this, if they would only receive my love, if they would only, they're trying to meet all their love languages, and no matter what you do, you never fill it because it's a deeper hole, their childhood.
It is a bottomless void. It really is. There's never filling it. And then the other thing for the partner of a narcissist is the narcissist is always changing the game or raising the bar. You may have met criteria to be a good partner one day, and the next day you were not good enough. So it is a bottomless void of shame. It's usually shame that the narcissist, I think, main emotion is, and nothing ever fills it.
How does someone start gaining the strength, the courage, the sense of I can handle and tolerate the grief, the fear? Because I feel like the fear can block people in their unworthiness and their shame from actually taking the necessary steps to healing. So where does someone begin?
That's a good question. The courage, the bravery of people walking this path just astounds me every single day. It takes so much effort and time and devotion to yourself, which people who have been with a narcissist aren't used to kind of paying that much attention to themselves. There's no room in that relationship for that. But I think it really gets to the point where it's intolerable. They just can't take it anymore. The manipulation and the crazy making behavior from the narcissist often just pushes people into therapy. And I'm so grateful. When I started this work, Dr. Ramani was the only person I know of that was talking about this when I started doing this. So people would stumble across like her YouTube videos and say, oh, that matches. Now there's a plethora of YouTube and social media talk about this. So people are finding, I think, that there's language to describe what they've experienced. And thankfully, that validates for them what they've gone through. So I think that realization, that discomfort gets so strong that they know that something needs to shift, something needs to change. And now they have these avenues to put words to what they're feeling and what they're thinking. And then they also have avenues for therapists like myself and other therapists that are working with this population to be supported as they walk this path again. And it's a long path to walk. I wish we could just rip the Band-Aid off and have it all be healed, but it takes a lot. People who've been with narcissists also, I would say probably 85% worry that they are a narcissist too. When they come into therapy, they say, I'm worried I'm a narcissist. And then when we dig a little deeper, it's because that's what's been modeled for them.
I'm so glad you said that, because so many people are afraid to turn out like the narcissistic parent or their narcissistic partner, or they feel selfish because they've been told they're selfish.
Exactly. And all of the above, right? They see similarities between themselves and their narcissistic parent. And I think they generalize that to mean, oh, I'm exactly like them. And of course, we behave in ways that were modeled for us in childhood. But when we know better, we do better, right? We know that those ways don't get the results that we want. We shed that. A narcissist doesn't. A narcissist just finds new victims. They just move on to the next person who hasn't gotten wise to their games yet. With parents and children, obviously that doesn't happen. But what happens with parents and children, unfortunately, the children in the family, and this is true even if there's only one child, are assigned roles like scapegoat, golden child, forgotten child. One child might be the golden child one week and the scapegoat the next week. So that dynamic is shifting even in that small circle. In partnered relationships, it's likely the narcissistic partner is cheating. I mean, that's pretty common for them, but they're finding new supply all over the place.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that was one of my questions. Because I find that there's somebody on the side.
Always.
In couples therapy, I can feel it. I can go, this is just a sham. Like, I'm not buying what you're selling. And then when I call that out, I bring that into the light. They do not like me. I am now the target. And then behind the scenes, they'll go, I feel attacked in therapy. I don't want to go back to her. I mean,
she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Yeah. I mean, this is classic.
It is.
And then the other partner's like, no, I feel like she's onto it. I feel like I'm getting somewhere. Yeah. And the partner wants to stay. And what percentage, and this is totally, you're just, I don't think there might be, you might know, is there statistics around narcissistic abuse, like them cheating or addiction?
Addiction is high. I don't have numbers off the top of my head. Addiction is high with this population, which you would expect. I mean, given that they come from trauma, typically, trauma and addiction have like an 86% correlation, somewhere along that number. So that makes sense to me. And the cheating part, just anecdotally, I've noticed that, like, even if they're not fully having relationships outside of their primary relationship, they usually have, I've heard the word harem, and I don't like that term to be used, but they usually do have people kind of that they're keeping kind of on a string. They flirt with just enough to keep them interested, but not enough to get them in trouble with their primary relationship. There's almost always people around that they could be the next source of supply when the primary relationship goes south.
So paying attention to how you feel is your key piece. How do you feel? And if you're getting love bombed, that's showering with compliments, that's telling them how wonderful they love them, they give them gifts. What other love bombing type things do you see with narcissists?
It's usually pretty overt behaviors like that. Sometimes it's doing something for you. Most of the time they're not doing anything for you, but it could be using the love languages. It could be an act of service. They may do the dishes, but they're going to want to be rewarded for that. And they're not just going to do it, but that would be a way of love bombing in little subtle ways. And I remember having a client saying that she was never love bombed, but when we got deeper into her history and her story with her narcissist, there were little moments like picking the kids up from school when he normally wouldn't, little things like that, which most of us would just think that's part of co-parenting. But for a narcissist, they're seriously going out of their way because they don't get any benefit. There's no attention given to them for going to pick the kids up from school. Unless they get out of the car and look at me, I'm the great parent. But that to them is also a form of love bombing.
That's a good example. What's the difference between a sociopath, because there's the great book, The Sociopath Next Door, and a narcissist? What's the difference between the two?
Empathy. It really is empathy, which may sound crazy when we're just talking about not having much empathy. But I think if you look at this all on a spectrum, and I have seen narcissistic traits very low on the spectrum, still damaging, but maybe not necessarily permanently damaging a relationship. And then we go all the way to the other extreme. As we get less and less empathy, I think we start walking into sociopathy or dissocial personality disorder. But it is really, a narcissist will have some empathy, and that little bit of empathy probably stops them from doing worse things than they do. But I think that is really the defining difference, in my opinion.
So when someone's on this healing path, they want to get out of the relationship, they want to maybe have boundaries with their parent. Got two scenarios here. Maybe you're in a relationship with somebody, a romantic relationship. Perhaps you're in a relationship with someone in your family or a friend or coworker, like you said. What are the key ingredients, if you will, for healing from this relationship with a narcissistic person?
So I cannot stress this enough. Validation from other people, first of all. People believing the stories that you're telling, because I used this example recently. Your narcissist do something really, what might seem really benign, but to you, you know that it had deeper meaning. Maybe you harken back to something 20 years ago, but because they don't let go of anything, they hold grudges in a big way. You cooked them an egg that morning and it was over easy instead of hard boiled or something, right? That could be enough for a rage to start. And when you go and tell the people that you're close to, oh, he got mad because I cooked the egg the wrong way, people are not going to be able to piece all of the parts together to understand what deep significance a little thing and a little argument like that might be. So when folks have an opportunity, we offer a support group, and I know there are other support groups than just mine, but they have the opportunity to have support around them, people that understand what narcissistic abuse is and understand like the nuances of what a little comment or a little look can mean. I would say too, children of narcissistic parents, I am sure that they can walk into the room that their parent is in and just punch up, just feel, whether there's an attack coming on. And most people aren't going to understand that if they haven't experienced it. So having the support and the knowledge of this kind of abuse, I think, is incredibly important. The validation is absolutely essential. And the thing that made me laugh when you asked this initially was self-care, because I know self-care is something that we talk about all the time. And folks who have been with a narcissist, self-care is just such a foreign thought to them because their waking hours are devoted to keeping the peace, right? Trying to fly under the radar of any rage. So self-care is just never even a thought. And when I say self-care, I mean little things like go out and put your feet in the grass or smell a flower, or, it doesn't have to be a spa day. It can be something that you just take a minute to do some breath work or to just some way to just get away from kind of the chaos that is happening in the house or in that relationship. 10 minutes, give yourself 10 minutes at a time and just grow that from there. It is so incredibly important. And boundaries, of course, are essential as well.
And do you find narcissists don't respect the boundaries? I mean, that's really what happens. So it's like, I'm trying to set the boundary, but they keep railroading me or gaslighting me.
Exactly. Gaslighting is sort of the basic tool for a narcissist. That's it. If you put a boundary up, you're going to be gaslit that you're hurting them by putting that boundary up. That is going to happen, no doubt about it. The really important thing for people to realize is the boundary is for you, not for them. Because when I started doing this work and I would talk about boundaries for people, I would hear exactly what you just said. Well, they're not going to respect that. No, they're not. They never will. But what you can do is maybe start to extinguish their behavior by backing out. You don't have to show up. You don't have to argue back, which I know sounds defeated, but it's important. There's no point in arguing with a narcissist either. So we use the term gray rocking in narcissistic abuse language. You're as dull as a gray rock. That is a boundary. You don't interact. You don't give them anything to kind of feed off of. You just dull, right? You just don't engage. You're brief in your interactions with them. If you have to have them, you kind of all business. You just don't engage. And that is a strong boundary. And the other part of that too is that remember, you can maybe remove yourself from the situation. If they're raging at you or gaslighting or whatever, you might be able to just go to the bathroom. You may not be able to leave the house, go to the bathroom, but getting away, kind of breaking that turbulence that's going on in the communication, I think is a really powerful thing and empowering thing for the person who puts that boundary in place for themselves.
I love that term. You said gray rock?
Gray rock, yeah.
Yes, because what I find people do is they like build a case on why they did that. Like we were out of groceries. So I went to the groceries and I was going to make this dinner and I was going to be back by 5. And I'm like, what just happened? Like you're going into building a case on why you did it. And gray rocking is just, I'm not going to engage.
Exactly. And I get that too. I mean, we have a sense of justice, right? We want some balance and we're never going to get that with a narcissist. It is a futile effort that is only going to, I think, exhaust us if we try to engage in defending ourselves. And I know that sounds terrible, but I promise you're going to feel a lot better if you gray rock and just avoid all the chaos that's going to happen if you're in a position where you're defending your behavior or your words.
That's the best recommendation. I really do. And I also want to talk about texting because I feel like this is where people will get, I'm like, stop. No, stop. Pass go to that collect $200. Do not engage. Do not respond. But it's like a compulsion. Like, I'm going to text back. And I'm like, don't. How do you recommend somebody when their texts are blowing up or maybe their emails, but texting seems to be what people are doing now? How
it is.
Recommend?
So stop. That really is my recommendation. And it's hard for people, especially if you're married or you're co-parenting. I mean, it's almost impossible, but you can block somebody temporarily. You can take a break. You can turn your phone off. Maybe not in all situations, but you can block that person. I was in a meeting. I couldn't have my phone blowing up like that. But I will tell you, I had a client one time that was sitting in my office and we counted the texts. It was 154 texts in 30 minutes. He wanted to know where she was. I mean, he was very, very controlling, but just could not handle the fact that she wasn't texting back. So she finally turned her phone off. But I think there's also this worry that there's going to be hell to pay if you put that boundary in place too. We do have the ability to say, I'll talk to you about this when I get home. And you can stop it there. I know we're kind of treading into what could be dangerous behavior too, depending on how abusive the narcissist is. If there hasn't been extreme abuse, like physical or anything really extreme, I think it's safe to do something like, I'll talk to you about this when I get home. I'm turning my phone off. And these are boundaries that we can put in place. I think that another thing to remember, and this is probably not going to sound very nice, but most narcissists are cowards. They really are underneath it all. So when you kind of take a stand, of course, you're going to get pushback. But if you say, this is what I'm going to do, and you stand by it, they're going to be taught a new behavior from you, like what you're going to allow. And it will come in tiny little doses, but that's how you build the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's important. And then if someone's in a dangerous situation, you'll want to get a protective order. You'll want some support around that. That's absolutely a conversation if it gets escalated to that level.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. I don't want to encourage anybody to do something that they fear will put them in danger. Absolutely not. Don't do that. But most of the time we can put these little boundaries in place that are quite empowering, even though it may not feel that way. And it probably actually will feel that way because we're not used to putting boundaries up. But little things can make a big difference and can start change and actually help the person feel empowered to change the relationship in whatever way they feel they need to change it.
Yeah. And it plays with your mind. I think that's the whole net of being with somebody that's a narcissist, or even maybe some mental health issues, is you begin to feel like you're the bad person. Wait, why am I feeling like I'm the bad person? Mm-hmm. It's so subtle. It feels like it's in the nooks and the crannies.
It is. I say that a lot. Actually, it is in the nooks and crannies, and it just kind of seeps in slowly in all the veins. I used this example yesterday of movie Venom, and I think they did this in Spider-Man too, where it's like a plant root that's kind of seeping into the body. And I feel like that is such a great kind of visual for what narcissistic abuse feels like. Just filling that nastiness into your cellular structure.
And that's the body sensation you're talking about when you walk into a room. At least you described it with a parent. You feel it in your physiology.
Absolutely.
You're waiting for the next, you're like bracing for the next dysregulated outburst. Or even if they're very passive aggressive and they look calm, there's an intensity there. So you're waiting, kind of bracing yourself to try to protect yourself. So listen to your body. I think that has so much powerful information.
You were so right. It has so much information. Children of narcissists turn that off and then it stays turned off, or when you get in a relationship in adult years, you turn it off because you're gaslit to saying, no, you're wrong. There's nothing wrong. Even though your body's screaming, get out of here, this person's not being nice or whatever it is, they're going to convince you that whatever it is that you're experiencing isn't real. We learn to ignore that. But when we bring that back online, it tells us everything we need to know.
Yes. Brenda, you are so wise, and I'm so grateful for our time together.
Thank you.
If someone wants to join the support group, can they join from anywhere in the U.S.? Okay, so if I've got clients or other therapists are working with clients or anybody listening, they can join, and it's NARC. Can you give them
It's narctrauma.com. We have a place there that you can sign up for the groups on Calendly, and it's also on stevenstherapy.com. We have it in both places. And Stevens is STEPHENS, just to make sure you go to the right place. But both pages have sign up for the group. Everyone is welcome. We do it every week on a Thursday, 1:00 Pacific time. And we literally have had people from all over the world. So, I mean, everyone is welcome. I can't say that strongly enough. We want people there. We want people to feel supported. And I run the group myself. It's kind of my little passion project.
I love that. How many people are in the group? Because that's always a question clients want.
Yeah.
And it probably depends on the week, I'm guessing.
It totally depends on the week. We cap it at 10. We almost never have 10. It usually averages, we kind of have some regulars, and then we have some other folks that kind of pop in and out and will come in over time and then be gone for a while. But we cap it at 10. We typically have between 5 and 8. So,
And you can just come, or do you have to register, or how does that work?
So you have to register. We do charge $20 for the group. So you register on the website. If people go to the either website, you'll see there's a spot for registering for the group. And then our intake specialist at our practice sends out a Zoom link. So we do it over Zoom every Thursday. She sends that out. We stop at 10. And I do like the groups to be small so that people have an opportunity to share and be heard, because it's not often a privilege that they have in other environments. So we do keep it small, but we hardly ever sell out.
I think it's a fantastic resource. Yes.
Thank you.
Tell us about where they can find your books. And you have a workbook, you've got books. So can you tell us a little bit about where to find those?
Yeah. So they're, I think, both on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. The first book I wrote was, let me caveat this by saying this was the publisher's choice of topic, but it's titled Narcissistic Mothers, A Daughter's Guide. So it is about relationships with narcissistic mothers. I will say I wrote it in a way that it really encompasses both parents. And when I talk about that in there, that I think is really important for children of narcissists to look at in my book or any book, is that typically you have a narcissistic parent and an enabling parent. That enabling parent may be narcissistic as well. I think I would love to do a whole book and a whole practice around enabling parents, because I feel like they can be just as damaging.
Yes,
but
I need work on that. I will champion you in that.
Thank you. They do tend, a lot of times you'll see a malignant narcissist parent with a covert narcissist parent, and that covert narcissist parent is often the enabling one. So you can only imagine if they're enabling the narcissist, there's children involved, and they're covert, so they're kind of woe is me. They throw the children under the bus. The children are fair game if it protects them, and that's a horrible situation for a child to be in. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
No, because we need more about that. I really believe that. So I want to just encourage you to put that out there.
Thank you.
Really.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand, because I've had people come to me too, like my dad was a narcissist, but my mom was okay. And then as we do the work, it's like, oh, mom maybe wasn't really okay. Mom wasn't there. Mom was checked out, which leaves the children to fend for themselves.
Exactly. And then you have a workbook too.
I do. So the workbook, it's not the Narcissism Recovery Workbook. It is a step-by-step guide on how to heal from this. I strongly encourage people to work with a therapist, if they're using the book or not, work with a therapist, because there's trauma held in the body, there's trauma held in the mind when you've experienced these relationships. But the workbook is a guide to help you kind of move through the grief, move through all the kind of steps that you're going to go through as you're walking that path of healing from this relationship or these relationships.
I highly encourage you go out, get the books, get on Brenda's website, join the group if you need support. I'm telling you, this is spot on, Brenda. The support you get is essential. It's essential. It's like a non-negotiable. So please, if you're in this situation or know somebody or have a friend or a family member, please share this podcast and share Brenda's resources. So thank you so much, Brenda, for being on the Close the Chapter podcast. I appreciate you, your heart, your wisdom, and being here today.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week, and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, KRISTEN, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks, and have a great day.